Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Furman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, powered by FanDuel Sportsbook. Big show on tap for you today. I am your host, Todd Furman, joined as always by the one, the only Payne Insider. And Payne, NFL Draft, NFL offseason, Kentucky Derby, the sports betting calendar rests for no one.
I'm glad you could take time out of your busy schedule. I know hockey is here.
Oh, we had people
to record.
We had people clamoring for a little Stanley Cup talk. I didn't want to divulge that your huge Penguins fandom. I figured the triple overtime thriller against the Rangers kept you up into the wee hours of the morning the other night, but I wasn't quite sure about that.
Against your beloved Rangers, and I did not watch it. I haven't really gotten into hockey this season. And by the way, when you say we had some people, you mean one. One particular individual.
Every journey starts with a single step. And so if there's one loyal Bet the Board listener clamoring for hockey content, it's a step in the right direction. But we have some other big things in the works that we may or may not divulge on this show. Either way, it appears that Bet the Board may have some expansion potential. But before we get into all the NFL, let's get a little housekeeping out of the way. And with the biggest horse race of the year quickly approaching, you can bet the Kentucky Derby risk-free up to $200 with TVG. New TVG players get started with a risk-free bet up to $200. That means you'll get $200 back if your horse doesn't win. TVG app gives you all the tools you need to bet the Kentucky Derby. Sign up with the promo code BetTheBoard for your chance to bet risk-free up to $200 exclusively on TVG.com. Age and residency restrictions apply. New users only. Refund issue is non-withdrawable site credit that expires after 30 days. Visit TVG.com for offer. Payne, it's important for folks to know because depending on what state they're in, if they've already used FanDuel, you're still eligible to take advantage of this risk-free $200 for the Derby.
Beautiful.
So we want to get everybody in there, and like we said, a busy show. John Sheeran will be by as well, and a special guest that'll remain nameless to break down the Derby. But your beloved NFL, you got on my case throughout the course of March Madness. I wanted to talk pro football. You went, nope, not going to happen. We're just here to talk college basketball. Do we have your permission to talk NFL now?
Of course, because this is an NFL-dedicated podcast that isn't conflicting or I know is going to run 90 minutes as is, that we're just lumping football.
We're allowed to commingle topics. That's how things work around here. But, I guess since you are the NFL guru here and I'm along for the ride, is there a particular offseason storyline that you think provides a logical starting point for us?
Well, the person that I shunned your NFL talk with was Tom Brady, correct?
That, I believe, was correct. With Tom Brady retiring, then unretiring amid all sorts of speculations about trying to strong-arm various franchises. So I guess Tom Brady provides a logical place to start, especially because he is the GOAT.
He never actually officially retired. I don't think he used those words. He used Todd Furman-like corporate PC in that diatribe that he spewed on Twitter.
Which is underrated, by the way, as a tool to kind of dance between the raindrops. Let that be a lesson to everybody, whether it's relationships or in corporate environments, to take advantage of that.
It doesn't necessarily work long-term because the person that eats that shit can sense when it's coming. They can taste it. Okay. There was a noise there. Go ahead.
No. I was going to
iterate on that noise you made.
You may or may not be right with all that. You can only blow smoke up someone's ass for so long before they eventually see through it. And, we've used the quote before. What's the line from Tommy Boy that I'm inevitably going to butcher? I'd rather take the butcher's word for it, but I could stick my head up a cow's ass. Something along those lines. But, all right, Tom Brady. All right, peel back the onion for us. Let us know what was actually taking place and what really transpired with TB12 this offseason.
So the story has certainly surfaced a little bit, but for those unfamiliar, it's very clear that Tom Brady and Bruce Arians don't get along. And if you've listened to Bet the Board, you kind of know that relationship was a little rocky going back to year one. You had Bruce Arians calling out Tom Brady publicly multiple times, and then as much of a grouch as Belichick is, he's never ridiculed Brady forward-facing, and he's far more accomplished than Arians. So, there's this story out there where basically prior to the first season bye in 2020, where the Bucs dropped like three or four games, Brady's people, Arians' people staged this multi-day golf outing so they could get on the same page and fix the relationship, and the NFL caught wind of it, and due to the big C, they nixed it. But apparently the two of them spent multiple days together at the Bucs facility, and then out of the bye week, suddenly Tampa's offense fit Tom Brady's skill set better, and they went on to win the Super Bowl. The public rumors this past season about Brady and Leftwich came out recently, where those two would come up with the offensive game plan while Arians was out rehabbing, and then Arians would come in and effectively just red mark the entire game plan, and that didn't sit well with Brady and even Leftwich. So Brady kind of masterminded this idea and constructed a plan where two Michigan men, Tom Brady and Stephen Ross, would work together in Miami. It was going to be this ownership role. And then at that point, the Dolphins would trade a pick for the rights to Tom Brady. There was some language in Brady's Bucs extension last year where, yes, he extended, but he didn't think it was completely binding because the only way he was signing the extension was to clear cap space for the betterment of the Bucs organization, and they all acknowledged that together at the time. Who knows how it would have played out, above my pay grade, but once that unfolded, then Sean Payton was going to be the next domino to fall. This plan all got nixed the moment Brian Flores filed the 58-page lawsuit. And so Brady is back with the Bucs.
It's one hell of a storyline. This is going to be a great ESPN 30 for 30 when the GOAT tried to hijack a franchise. And clearly, when you see if Tom Brady comes back and is able to take this team back to the promised land, it was such a sensational career as we've known that Tom's been able to put forth. But when you look at the Bucs roster, other than just the Tom Brady situation, I mean, we know the NFC is wide open. The quarterback balance of power has clearly shifted to the AFC. Did you like some of the moves from the Bucs this offseason? Do you feel this roster leaves a lot to be desired? I know we're going to preview all these teams in great detail in yes. July to break it down, but just wanted to get your quick high-level thoughts on the Bucs offseason so far.
Well, Brady comes back in part that he looks at the landscape and was like, oh my God, this is like the NBA when the Western Conference was absolutely loaded and the Eastern Conference only had LeBron. So there is certainly an easy path to an NFC championship here. I like the Russell Gage signing, certainly came on last year. Now you have a little bit better quarterback play. Logan Ryan is an interesting move as well. Shaq Mason, fantastic acquisition, especially what it cost. We're big fans of Rashad White. Other than that, this is kind of what it is. We'll see if Gronk continues to push forward. What is interesting to me, and I think probably where I was going to kick this off and not get into the nitty-gritty of what the Bucs roster is, have you read the lawsuit, Todd? The 58-pager?
Absolutely not. I have not gone through page by page, figured it was not essentially football related. That was going to help us handicap it, so I did not go through the whole 58 pages. But apparently, you may tip your hand to tell me I have some weekend reading ahead of me and or a homework assignment.
Yes, you should absolutely go ahead and read that. And it kind of ties into what we talked about at the top with Brian Flores moving on and this Tom Brady and the Dolphins situation kind of fizzling out. And we don't need to get into like the racial injustice that was claimed in the 58 pages, but specifically to the Dolphins and Tom Brady, there was this alleged tampering situation with a prior Brady-Ross engagement on a boat where Flores left the meeting as soon as he saw Brady. There's claims of being compensated past the contract to tank games. And I think this is maybe important, and we're going to get on the soapbox here. But the reason the league is looking into the tanking of game situation more than what they're claiming forward-facing is we saw the Ridley suspension. And the league takes this tanking thing very seriously because it knows the casual fan can't comprehend the difference between games being fixed and strategically playing for the future. And so inevitably what happens is when player shits the bed or a ref makes a horrific call, suddenly a casual fan loses $20 on a bet and they're claiming the game's fixed. But playing for the future is different, and having your young players get reps for the future makes more sense than playing middling veterans. And there's obviously like a threefold bonus there. You get the young guys playing time, you find out if the young guys can be a part of your future plans, and then in the process you lose games and enhance your draft capital. It's very smart, and it's why I kind of laugh at the idea of Seattle trading for Baker Mayfield. And I just immediately ask, why would they ever do that? Now, they might.
Because it's better than drafting another running back in the first 3 rounds if you're the Seattle Seahawks?
I guess my point here is Baker Mayfield, when healthy, is probably an average to slightly below average quarterback. The goal isn't to win 7, 8, 9 games and then lose draft capital in the process. The far better choice is lining up Geno or Locke under center and put yourself in a position where you can draft Stroud or Young in 2023. And that's going the route that is smart and strategic and doesn't mean you're tanking or fixing games.
It's wild. I mean, you look at it, and I understand, fans who sit there and say a franchise's obligation is to try and put a competitive product on the field. But rather than toiling away in anonymity with a record of 7-10, 8-9 for years, you'd rather go boom to bust. Go 1-16, have a chance to get your Peyton Manning if you're one of these franchises, and suffer through the downtime so you could have that franchise quarterback and a level of stability. But I think it's a tough bill of goods to try and sell to fan bases. Now, I do think this provides a logical segue when we talk about Miami and everything going on there to what the Dolphins have done this offseason, highlighted by their acquisition of Tyreek Hill. Mike McDaniel steps in as the new head coach, and you look at the Dolphins, you're going to need a program to figure out all the new faces on this roster. And we can start with the ads, and Chase Edmonds, Teddy Bridgewater comes in as a backup. The money they spent on Teron Armstead, Cedric Wilson, Raheem Mostert, Connor Williams, Alex Ingold. The list goes on and on, but let's focus more on the Tyreek Hill trade, Payne. This is a guy who we've seen at his best is as difficult a matchup as any in the National Football League. But the Dolphins committed a lot of capital to him. They didn't give up a ton in the way of draft capital, at least in my opinion, but it's a guy whose skill set is predicated on speed, who's now getting into his late 20s, early 30s. Did you like the deal for the Miami Dolphins in acquiring Tyreek Hill?
It is what it is. All of these deals... And I think there's something important to know. Like, both the Chiefs and the Dolphins wanted Tyreek Hill. There's always like this narrative when a high-profile player leaves an organization that the team no longer wanted him. Brett Veach wanted to keep Tyreek. But in this instance, the Dolphins wanted Tyreek more and are far more desperate. So that's the interesting component here. And from the Dolphins' perspective, like, this makes Tua excuseless. We're now 3 years removed from the hip surgery. You exchange a defensive mind in Brian Flores, who tried throwing you under the bus multiple times, and replaced him with an elite offensive mind in Mike McDaniel. And McDaniel's certainly quirky, who knows if he can manage a locker room, but Kyle Shanahan said Mike McDaniel's the smartest offensive mind he's ever been around. Let's see. The weapons are elite, right? Waddle, Tyreek, Gesicki, as good as a trio in the NFL as you're going to find. The question becomes, can Tua get them the ball? He's certainly accurate, but he throws with just so much anticipation. He tends to make mistakes. We know he can't make all the throws. And we're going to see if Mike McDaniel can bring the aggressiveness out of him. Because if you look at Tua, only attempted 30 passes all season last year of 20 or more yards, second lowest rate among qualifying quarterbacks. Is that the kind of receiver that's going to bring the most out of Tyreek Hill? From Tyreek Hill's perspective, certainly he wants to perform, but he's already gotten paid. So, is what it is, right? Then you have Chris Greer go out of his way to bring in the most expensive left tackle in free agency. You add Connor Williams at guard. They even have enough cap space to address right tackle with a veteran before camp. Ultimately, this is interesting from the perspective of going back to the very top, because Tom Brady has 1 year left on his contract, and this is probably the last road for Tua. If he does not perform, you could probably see Tom Brady slip into this next year if he decides to return. In terms of Kansas City, they're certainly not going to be better in the short term without Tyreek, but it does open kind of this windfall of cash in some draft capital. And the thing about the Chiefs is all the teams chasing them with young quarterbacks in the AFC, like the Chargers and the Bengals, still have their quarterbacks on a rookie deal. The Chiefs have already hit reset. So it's Super Bowl or bust for the Chargers and Bengals, and their rosters will too deplete when that's no longer the case. But the interesting part here for Mahomes, and again, he gets this negative connotation about him all of a sudden over the last year because, his family's a little unbearable. But if you look at Mahomes without Tyreek Hill, there's this 4-season sample. When Tyreek Hill has missed a game or wasn't on the field for a particular play, you put both those instances in a bowl and add it all up. Mahomes has played to the second best EPA per dropback in the NFL the last 4 seasons when Tyreek Hill is off the field. So this isn't just, we're going to close up shop, boys, and look for, look to move things 4 years ahead and maybe we can win then. Very interesting dynamic there with the Chiefs. You add MVS, you add Juju, Sky Moore. It's certainly not as good as last year, but I don't think this is we're just going to pack up shop and play for the future.
Did you like what the Chiefs did defensively in the draft with 2 first-round picks, picking up the edge rusher and George Karlaftis from Purdue and getting Trent McDuffie to help fortify their secondary?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting situation. I mean, the Chiefs had 12 picks, right? So you knew they were going to go up. They were going to be willing to move around in this draft with that much capital. They had 2 very clear needs defensively. It was corners, defensive end. For about a week, the worst kept secret was Brett Veach wanting to move up. And he did, and there was 2 options. It was catch the falling knife that was Jermaine Johnson or know thy enemy, right? Brett Veach knew his enemy and leaped Buffalo to take Trent McDuffie, who some reported Buffalo may try to get to Minnesota at 12 to take McDuffie. That's how much Sean McDermott wanted him. I'm a George Pickens guy, but people smarter than me prefer Sky Moore. Moore certainly kind of fits the type of receiver Andy Reid apparently likes because Mahomes really hasn't had a big body receiver go up and catch contested balls that's actually competent, And regardless of the numbers and testing for Sky Moore, just always makes me a little nervous when you go from beating up on NIU during midweek Maction and making that NFL leap. Meanwhile, pre-injury George Pickens is treating the 3rd overall pick in this draft like a toddler when they played. So let's see if that decision plays out,
Yeah, you'd have to hope for Sky Moore that his learning curve in the NFL is a little bit more robust than what Corey Davis was able to accomplish. It took him about 4 years to be able to make an impact. We'll see if that deal pays dividends for the Jets since he didn't spend a ton of time on the football field this past year. But when we talk about receivers, Tyreek Hill, of course, wasn't the only big name to change jersey colors. Davante Adams reunited with his former college teammate and one of his best friends in Derek Carr. The Raiders, this was a team that was relatively fortunate, and we chronicled it throughout the course of late in the regular season and even on our Wildcard podcast to even get into the playoff picture. They bring in a new head coach. They have a new shiny weapon offensively. We may see a change in offensive philosophy if Coach McDaniels has his wish. He'll be running back by committee with the Raiders not picking up the 5th-year option for Josh Jacobs. But when you look at the Raiders offseason, other than Davante Adams, he wasn't the only big name that they brought in. They obviously addressed some deficiencies on the defensive side of the ball as well.
Yes, but Davante Adams is obviously the guy that moves the dial. And again, it's a similar situation to the Dolphins where they just wanted Davante Adams more than the Packers, They're a little bit more desperate. They saw what was going around in their own division and were like, we can't compete here unless we make a splash move. And whether they were 2-step thinkers, forward thinkers, and said, hey, if we reset the market for Davante Adams, Tyreek Hill and his agent are going to say, maybe we want to reset the market, and that leads him out of Kansas City, which ultimately ended up happening. We're not going to give him credit for that, but that's ultimately how the dominoes fell. We know the relationship with Derek Carr going back to their days at Fresno, so there's some nice PR that comes along with that. We know what Davante Adams is. Finished last season top 3 in yards per route run, target share, red zone targets. He was responsible for more than 35% of the Packers' air yards, but from where I'm kind of sitting here, the Packers weren't necessarily wrong, I don't think, and maybe you disagree, but we're talking about Tyreek Hill just turning 28, and I know he's a little bit more of a speed guy, but Davante Adams turns 30 in December. It's a 5-year deal worth more than $141 million, and in the process of that decision, Green Bay also got a 1st and 2nd round pick. So when you're in this midst that we're in right now where wide receivers are resetting the market, you have 2 directions, and it's pay him what you think he's worth, or we're just going to save some draft, or we're going to get draft capital back, and we're going to save some money and kind of reconfigure things. I don't think the Packers necessarily made a bad decision here.
I mean, my philosophy on some of this has always been different, and I haven't combed through the data, and it's not just for the NFL, but some of the other sports that are out there. You see it happen all the time in the NHL. Players get max deals. We saw Albert Pujols get, a ridiculous deal from the Angels. In my opinion, if you're going to sign some of these players to longer deals, and I know 5 years in the National Football League is an eternity, you better believe that this player is going to contribute to your championship window in the next 1 to 2 seasons, because at the tail end of all of these contracts, it becomes an albatross and a weight that brings you down. And for me, when I look at the Raiders, I get you're trying to sell goodwill. I get you're trying to put asses in the seat. I don't think the Raiders can win in the current landscape of the AFC. Maybe in 4 years they're fine, but Davante Adams isn't wide receiver one, whether it's fantasy or on-field production, by the time the Raiders have a roster that's capable of keeping up with the Joneses in this entire conference.
The hope is that you don't have a Robinson Cano situation. And you said keeping up with the Joneses, and I know you wanted me to talk a little bit about the defensive side of the stuff, so maybe a little dive into Chandler Jones, who I think we both believe is more valuable than what the market perceives him to be. Glad he got paid. It would appear that the Achilles injury is past him at this point. Massive upgrade, finished 9th in quarterback hits. And I think now this provides a perfect complement, because Ngakoue is kind of a tier 2, tier 3 pass rusher. And now you won't have Max Crosby seeing substantial double teams. And I think their defense does get a little bit better there. In terms of the head coach, I have no idea what to expect there. I don't know what Josh McDaniels is. I know what's very interesting about his hiring process was he sold Mark Davis on the idea of getting both tight ends on the field and playing a little bit more 12 personnel. Well, with an ounce of research, we noticed that the Patriots reset the tight end market last season completely and only managed to use 12 personnel about 30% of the time. So let's see what Josh McDaniels is. I honestly have no idea. None whatsoever.
Well, I think Raiders fans are about to find out in what is the most competitive division, not only in football this year, but maybe in the history of the league. When you look at some of the star power, especially at the quarterback position, for the 3 other teams that they're going to have to jump over if they're going to get back to the playoffs or even have a chance to compete for a division title. But with the Davante Adams trade, obviously, Payne, it's not just one way. There's another team that had to replace a void at wide receiver. That, of course, would be the Green Bay Packers. Their fans clamoring for Green Bay to use draft capital to pick a wide receiver in the first round. Green Bay didn't elect to do so, instead focusing on the defensive side, bringing in a pair of Georgia defenders in Devontae Wyatt and Quay Walker. Sammy Watkins gets added on a 1-year deal, and then Green Bay addresses wide receiver, bringing in a North Dakota State product, hoping that Christian Watson can be that guy. When you look at the Packers, Aaron Rodgers surrounded by enough weapons to allow them to remain atop a lackluster NFC North.
Very similar to my thought process on the Chiefs. Immediately, you are not better. I mean, Davante Adams in his current form for this upcoming season is likely worth 1.5 points, 2 points. So we are downgrading Green Bay. I saw Mike Clay, who is very respected, believes Green Bay has the best roster in football right now. I don't believe that. Hopefully the offensive line is a little bit healthier. I think there's going to be a trending towards running the ball a little bit more with this wide receiver group that you have. It's nice that you go out in round 2 and snag a young receiver for Aaron Rodgers, but I don't know that impact immediately. Again, going from that division of football to the NFL, there's a little bit of a learning curve. And so I don't know. But what we do know is certainly the NFC, and this is something we're going to continue to talk about ad nauseum from now to the time we do previews, probably throughout the entire course of the season. The NFC is weak. Somebody has to win games, and that's seemingly what Green Bay does, win games despite the metrics indicating they should lose some of these games. And even though we're downgrading Green Bay heading into the season in our power numbers right now, we downgraded a lot of teams in the NFC, so it might not mean as much.
Well, one team we've definitely downgraded is the Atlanta Falcons, and I'm not sure it bears us wasting our breath talking about what that roster construct will look like. We can save that for the preview podcast and the 37 seconds they'll get for the Marcus Mariota experience. But they lose their veteran quarterback. They deal Matt Ryan to the AFC, and the Indianapolis Colts for the third straight season bring in a veteran quarterback. Phillip Rivers' experiment paid dividends to a certain extent. They came up just short against Buffalo in the playoffs. The train completely derailed late in the season last year with Carson Wentz. Here comes Ryan at 37 years of age, or he will be when the season starts. Failed to throw for 4,000 yards last season, first time since 2010. Did the Indianapolis Colts, in your opinion, do what they needed to in addressing the quarterback position, giving them a chance not only to win the division, or maybe even be a dark horse in the AFC?
Did you just nicely slander him throughout that question?
I'm a big Matt Ryan fan, but he's not a spring chicken at 37 years old. The one thing to his credit, he'll be behind a much better offensive line. And while I don't love the Colts' weapons at receiver, probably as much as I should, they're still significantly better than what he had to endure last year as a member of the Falcons.
I go out of my way to nip the Matt Ryan slander in the bud any chance I get because of people like you.
Is he going to be your personal crusade? Because for years it was Matthew Stafford. Now Stafford's reached the top of the mountain.
Vindication.
He's doing cute commercials and everything else, and we can say that he finally has received his crowning achievement. Can Matt Ryan be the next man to go through a reputation rehabilitation Payne Insider style?
He's obviously not mobile, never has been. You mentioned he turns 37 in a couple weeks, but I think he actually had a fantastic season in 2021 when you start looking at things fairly and putting it in the right context, and it's a brand new system with Arthur Smith. His best weapons were a rookie tight end and a running back / special teams ace / receiver in Cordell Patterson, who's played for, I think, 5 teams in 9 years. Matt Ryan played in front of a horrific offensive line. I believe they graded out 31st in pass protection, 26th in pass block win rate, and somehow he managed to finish top 10 in completion percentage above expectation and 7th in on-target pass rate. He can get the ball where it needs to be if you can keep him upright, and he does see a much better offensive line in front of him. When you look at the rare occasions the Falcons O-line actually kept Matt Ryan clean last year, which is only roughly about 60% of the time, he graded out the 12th best passer. I also think there is a feeling out process here of what's on the free agent wire. Would not shock me to see the Colts add another veteran receiver. Does a Julio, Matty Ice reunion make sense? Will Fuller is still available. I'm hearing the Browns are still kicking the tires on him, but that's very much dependent on how long the quarterback there is suspended for in Deshaun Watson. But I think the Colts likely add another weapon before camp.
Can I set a prop on who plays more games in 2023, Julio Jones or Will Fuller, with the cap being 7?
It's a good question. If it's Deshaun Watson as his quarterback, I would think Will Fuller.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know. That's a good question.
Hey, we know what Phillip Fuller's done. I mean, you were the first one to tell us a couple of years ago how much more efficient that Texans offense was with Fuller out there to take the lid off of defenses and allow DeAndre Hopkins to operate underneath to take advantage of some of the opportunities in coverage. Of course, the Colts, they do get another second-round receiver, bringing in Alec Pierce, who I know on draft day drew comparisons to Jordy Nelson. We'll see if he can be paired alongside Michael Pittman. But again, as much as I think you and I both like Pittman, we don't see him as a prototypical number one. And of course, he'll have the opportunity to continue proving his merits. As far as the Colts' defensive side, minor moves there. Just wanted to get your take on what Chris Ballard is doing to address that side of the ball as well.
I thought the Stephon Gilmore signing was perfect. It's a position of need. It's a premium position. Obviously, he was working his way back from a significant injury last year, but when he was on the field for Carolina, he wasn't his normal prime self, but he was a massive upgrade. We saw them kick the tires on Xavier Rhodes a few years back, and it was a boom-type signing. This obviously comes with a little bit more financial responsibility than initially the Xavier Rhodes signing did, but I like that. You do pick up Yannick Ngakoue, who, again, I think is probably a Tier 2, Tier 3 type pass rusher. Doesn't have all the moves, but I think they do upgrade that unit defensively.
It's a Colts team, I think, in a division by default that obviously now becomes the team to beat. We see Tennessee taking a slightly different direction. You've seen that reflected in their odds, where those teams were more or less co-favorites, right around plus $1.10 at FanDuel all offseason in the wake of the draft, and the Tennessee Titans dealing A.J. Brown to the Philadelphia Eagles. You see the Colts now at plus 105. The Titans drift out to plus 145. We'll see what Matt Ryan can do to stabilize the quarterback position. The defending Super Bowl champions, and we joked about Matthew Stafford, he gets a new deal. We know what the Rams have done in the past. They've said, hey, look, we don't care about draft capital. We want players that can produce now. They go out this offseason. They bring in Allen Robinson to help fortify the receiving core. We're not quite sure. I mean, well, we know Odell Beckham Jr. doesn't have a team now. We'll see if he ends up with the Rams. But to potentially replace that loss in productivity, they deal Robert Woods to the Tennessee Titans. And when you look at the signing of Bobby Wagner, clearly not the same linebacker that was playing for the Seattle Seahawks in their glory days. But what do you make of the Rams and their current direction for the way this team is trending?
The first thing is you have to feel great for Allen Robinson because he's still in his prime and has a top-tier quarterback finally throwing him the ball for the very first time in his career. You look at this laundry list of crap. It's Bortles, it's Henne, it's Trubisky, Foles, Dalton, Chase Daniel, and rookie Justin Fields. Those are the quarterbacks Allen Robinson has caught balls from in his career. And if you go back to last year, only 60% of the passes thrown to Allen Robinson were deemed catchable. So I'm sure that was super frustrating. For the Rams, this is interesting, right? You had to go get Robinson because you moved on from Woods, as you mentioned. It's unclear what's going to happen with OBJ, although he's not very happy that Cam Akers has taken his number 3. It would be interesting to me to see. You have to think about this. OBJ might not have as much leverage as people think coming off knee surgery. Is he going to be 100% healthy at the start of the season? We know why he went west. He's starting a family. His wife is likely going to deliver a baby at some point during this season. We know there was talks if the right receiver fell to the Chargers at 17, they would take them. Maybe he ends up in the same city, just a different uniform. Let's see how that plays out. Bobby Wagner, you mentioned, he is what he is. The eye in the sky doesn't lie. He's not a sideline linebacker anymore. I think he does upgrade the position because it was so bleak last year, although you do have a young guy in Ernest Jones. But Bobby Wagner's lost 2 steps. To me, this isn't a defending Super Bowl type roster. We know Andrew Whitworth retired. Von Miller departed to Buffalo. The aforementioned OBJ most likely not there. Darius Williams, Austin Colbert, Johnny Heckert. Those are some significant losses, and obviously it took some luck along the way for the Rams to actually pull off this Super Bowl championship. So, to me, even with the NFC being a little down, I don't know if this is a Super Bowl roster to my eyes at this point.
The team that the Rams defeated to win that elusive Super Bowl, that, of course, was the Cincinnati Bengals. It was a group that was embarrassed along the offensive line, albeit in a win against the Tennessee Titans. They struggled with pass block win rate all year long, and you look at Frank Pollock, needed to build a fortress in front of Joe Burrow. We talked at great lengths last offseason. Cincinnati went out, and they spent like drunken sailors. Clearly, it paid dividends, at least to some extent, on the defensive side of the ball. They go on a similar spending spree this offseason, committing $83 million to bringing in a trio of guys along the offensive line. La'el Collins from Dallas, Alex Kappa from Tampa, and a consummate veteran in Ted Karras from New England. I joke with you over text. This was a team that I thought the market was going to overvalue, one that I wanted to fade coming into the season. The more I dug into the way that they've handled the offseason, the respect that I have for Joe Burrow and some of his weapons, I'm starting to believe there's not going to be that much anticipated fall off from the Bengals unless Zach Taylor truly is the bumbling idiot we thought he was a couple seasons ago.
It's kind of the vibe I was giving you in that everyone's going to want to fade them because they overachieved by a large margin last year, but I'm not sure it's going to be in the cards, especially when you look at how they're priced in the market. They're the 3rd favorite in their own division. Now, the issue we talked about all last season, and Bengals fans got pissed off every time we mentioned it and said it didn't matter. Clearly it mattered. The own organization thought it mattered, right? Because they went out and they fixed and addressed the problem days into free agency. You mentioned Alex Kappa, the Ted Karras signing, and then when La'el Collins became a Cowboys cap casualty, Cincinnati pounced. So it looks like brand new starting center, right guard and right tackle. Let's see what this looks like. I mean, Joe Burrow had the 6th quickest release time last season, yet he was still pressured on 35% of his dropbacks because you mentioned how bad they were in pass protection. 30th in pass block win rate. You'd expect Jamar Chase in year 2 to improve some. T. Higgins battled an injury that required surgery down the stretch. I just don't know what it looks like in the AFC. Everyone is so damn good. teams are absolutely loaded, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in depth when we do the previews, but by that time, I think a lot of people will catch on. But in my mind, ultimately, what you're going to have here is there's always an inflation in win totals. There's always going to be a higher amount of wins in total set by sports books on these teams than actually they can be achieved, right? So right off the bat, you want to be looking at unders, generally speaking. But with the AFC this year, the conference is loaded. They actually add the added road game, right? Because it's an unbalanced schedule with 17 games. So I don't know if you're going to see a lot of overs in general from any professional bettors in the AFC. If you are going to be betting an over, it's probably coming in the NFC, a team that you potentially see rising as the division declines, knowing you get the extra home game and the weaker conference. So that's kind of something to look for. If you are going to be betting an over, I would project those transpiring a little bit more in the NFC this year than in the AFC.
It's a good philosophical thought, and things that I think when you look at that unbalanced schedule, the second season of 17 games, that has to be factored in, the importance of one less travel spot. And, as we'll talk about a little bit later in the show, I'm sure the schedules get released a week from today. We'll have a much better indication of what teams will be forced to go out on the road and play in inclement weather, who may have 3 road games in as many weeks, and a variety of other factors that obviously go a long way in determining where professional bettors want to tie up their capital for the better part of 9 months. Last but certainly not least, as far as one of the big season changes that we've seen, it all unfolded in the wake of the NFL draft. And that, of course, was the 6-game suspension handed down to DeAndre Hopkins for PED use. His comments, I'm not even going to delve into those because they're laughable at this point in the defense that all of these athletes come up with. I'd have more respect, honestly, for them. Go, hey, look, I was trying to get healthy. I was trying to get an edge. I got caught. I'll be better and more honest going forward. So in the wake of that, Arizona had an indication that they were going to be a little bit depleted at receiver. Lost Christian Kirk to the Jacksonville Jaguars. They trade for Hollywood Brown, reuniting to pair of Oklahoma teammates to maybe appease, I believe was the word you used to me over text, Kyler Murray in the wake of his unhappiness. But you dig into Arizona's current receiving options, A.J. Green, Greg Dortch, Andy Isabella, Rondale Moore. I mean, a group that I would have felt much more comfortable winning a midweek college football game than I would in the National Football League. The tight end position, Zach Ertz, Mac Williams, Trey McBride. But when you look at the Cardinals' receiving room as a whole, I mean, clearly this is a unit that leaves an awful lot to be desired.
All of college football faithful who bet sports, they're just still waiting on Dortch to be Jerry Rice. That's all I kept hearing at the college
Dortch,
level.
the Torch, baby.
Like,
Best nickname going out of Wake Forest.
You're spot on. Let's not really speak about the dirty test from Hopkins, but I can speak to the impact, and it's massive, obviously. And if you look at what Hopkins is actually asked to do, it's incredible. I mean, it's just line up outside, win one-on-one. And this is something we've talked about for a long time about Cliff Kingsbury. There's no disguising anything. Hopkins runs routes outside over 92% of the time. He's basically Kyler's security blanket. If you look at last season when Hopkins wasn't on the field, Kyler Murray's completion percentage dipped 7%. His yards per pass attempt plummeted from 8.8 to 6.6 yards. And then you start to think about the portion of the season Hopkins is missing. It's the first 6 games. And although we'll find out how vital those first 6 are when we get the exact schedule in its order, that's typically when Cliff Kingsbury teams do their damage. I know we touched on this last year, but it bears repeating. I believe we mentioned it in Week 17. But since 2013, Kingsbury's coached 9 seasons between Texas Tech and the Arizona Cardinals. Games 1 through 7 to start each of the seasons, Kingsbury's a combined 42-20. But from the 8th game onward over those 9 seasons, Kingsbury 17-45. And if you just look at the resume with the Cardinals, first 3 seasons, games 1 through 7, 15-5-1. Rest of the year, 19-20. So this becomes interesting. The Hollywood Brown trade for me isn't as bad as people make it out to be. And I'm not even a Hollywood Brown guy. Steve Keim, when you think about what he's done, and again, I'm not really a Steve Keim guy either, but they knew the Hopkins test was coming out because it transpired in November. So it basically forced the Cardinals to be aggressive, knowing, as you mentioned, losing Christian Kirk, right, in free agency. And everyone thinks it's a lot to give up for Hollywood Brown. I don't necessarily disagree, but he has an elite trait, right? It's speed. He's familiar with Cliff's system. He's played with Kyler at Oklahoma. So this, to me, is very much plug and play from a scheme and personality fit. And there's certainly questions about Hollywood Brown's hands. He doesn't have the size of receivers that I generally like. But there does seem to be this fundamental misunderstanding of trades by even the most well-known and respected analysts on TV and social media. And it drives me nuts. The difference in draft capital isn't as close to what people think transpired in that trade. That's all I heard. Is like, how did the Cardinals pay nearly the same thing for Hollywood Brown that the Eagles paid for A.J. Brown? I don't see anything close to being the same. If you look at the actual difference in value between the two trades, A.J. Brown cost another 340 points in draft capital. It's basically the equivalent of the 56th pick. That's a big difference. And then when you think about this, the larger discrepancy is when teams are forced to sign a player they're trading for to a massive extension. It typically reduces what you have to spend in draft capital to acquire that player. And how that isn't understood by the most savviest football minds drives me absolutely bananas. A.J. Brown got a $100 million extension before he even hopped on a plane to Philly. For Arizona, Hollywood Brown is 2 more seasons of controlled cost. He's going to make $2.1 million this year. Keim's already going to pick up the 5th-year option, so Hollywood Brown's on the books for $13.4 million next season. Roughly $15 million over the next 2 seasons. These aren't even close, okay? Now, I prefer A.J. Brown, the player, but the compensation required to make those 2 trades aren't anywhere on the same freaking planet. The one question I have for you as I kick this back, Todd, what'd you make of Lamar Jackson on Twitter?
I'd like my franchise quarterback to be much less emotional than Lamar Jackson has shown. And we've seen it in the past from some of these high-profile talents, guys that have much more accomplished resumes than Lamar, feeling that they have the opportunity to speak out, knowing that Lamar is still trying to negotiate what would be life-changing money in that extension, knowing that it's him and his mother working as a family shop more so than one of the big agencies. I probably would have kept that outburst to myself, regardless of how I felt, knowing that I wanted to endear and ingratiate myself to a franchise that has typically proven time and time again they do business more effectively than any team in the National Football League.
Why hasn't he inked an extension? And my understanding is Baltimore has come to him, and they haven't completely engaged. And now you're acting like that. And the weirdest part of the tweet storm that Lamar Jackson sent out is, and you hate to say this, maybe he's not as close with Hollywood Brown as he thought. Because we know Hollywood Brown requested a trade year 2 in the league, saying this offense isn't for him. Well, why isn't the offense for him? It's because of the quarterback running the show. And then we know that this deal was already predetermined and in the works to the point where Hollywood Brown is getting picked up by the GM of the Arizona Cardinals prior to draft starting to join their draft party. So to act as if you didn't know any of this makes the tweet storm even more bizarre in my mind.
Yeah, there's a number of different things. And look, I get, hey, football is a game played with emotion that typically you have to go out there and harness some of that, both on the field and off if you're going to be the face of one of these 32 franchises. But at the same time, I just sit there and cringe and want to remind people not that a lot of our listeners are going to be professional athletes in any capacity, but if emotion gets the best of you, put down Twitter, put down Instagram, take a walk around the block, and don't put anything out there publicly that you're not going to be able to take back.
I agree. And we saw something similar with Ryan Tannehill this week, saying he's not going to mentor Malik Willis. It's interesting.
What an idiot. What an idiot there. I mean, that's a different discussion entirely, and I get the fact that you don't want to try and groom your heir apparent, But why would you come out and say that publicly? All you've done, and I know it's life-changing money that Tannehill still has left on his deal, you're going to make it that much more difficult for another franchise to even consider kicking the tires and bringing you in as a backup that could earn for 3 to 5 years after your peak time of starting is in the rearview mirror.
That's exactly what that eliminates. Now, who knows if that's what Ryan Tannehill wants to do? He's a competitor. We know he kind of was cast aside by Miami and then had to dig his way back up the depth chart because he wasn't initially starting in Tennessee, and then he took Marcus Mariota's job. So we know he's kind of got that mindset of people being against him and wanting to prove them wrong, but you're spot on. He can be a backup quarterback when his skill sets completely diminish, and maybe he just didn't want to go that route. I don't know. But Chad Henne is still in the league for a reason, right? It's because he understands his role, and it's helping the number one get ready every week to play. Now, that won't be the case here, but you certainly want to give Malik Willis a chance, I would think, to hear him out and help him. And candidly speaking, maybe I'm off on this. I just don't see it with Malik Willis. I wouldn't be overly threatened there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm of the same mindset. There's a reason Willis's stock plummeted in that regard. Now, do I think it's worth taking a flyer on a quarterback there in the third round? Sure, may as well roll the dice and see. I don't think that pick I should be as critical of as maybe Carolina trading up to get Matt Corral when a quarterback like Sam Howell goes in the 5th round. And I know Howell has soured a little bit, and we'll get to some of the draft stuff in a second. But I think it's always fascinating when you look at the quarterback position. And there's no doubt if you're a starter in the league, you never want to be relegated to backup duty. But there are quarterbacks and countless examples. You name Chad Henne, we can go Chase Daniel, we can go Derek Anderson, guys that have made a lifelong killing about being backup quarterbacks and never needing to absorb a hit. Albeit most of them never had accomplished starting careers, but there are a lot of folks in Nashville would say that Ryan Tannehill has never had an accomplished starting career either, given what we saw on full display against the Cincinnati Bengals. You can follow Payne on Twitter.
Amazing how one game changes the entire vibe.
That's how it works.
Because the first 2 seasons when he took over for Mariota and then the following season, the historic numbers he was putting up, it was Ryan Tannehill's the greatest thing ever. Now suddenly he screws the pooch in one game, throws up on himself. No one wants him anymore. Kick him to the curb.
There is nobody more beloved by an NFL fan base than the backup quarterback. And Ryan Tannehill took over for Marcus Mariota, resurrected the team, led them to the number 1 seed, but on the biggest stage last year in a situation where all he had to do was throw the ball away. Clearly, some of the bloom is off the rose, but encourage all of you to follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You, of course, can follow me there as well. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. We do have an interview with John Sheeran waiting in the wings, which we'll get to with plenty of Derby talk. But before we even get into some of the Derby discussion, Payne, NFL Draft. I know it's an event you look forward to every single year, not just from a wagering perspective, but purely as a football fan. You have some traditions. You feel free to share them if you'd like in terms of what you do on Thursday and Friday and Saturday. But all the talk that comes out of the NFL Draft is always, what teams won the draft? Which teams lost? Obviously, if we take the 10,000-foot view of the National Football League, that's not something we're going to be able to ascertain until 3 or 4 years down the road. But when you look at the way everything went through the first 7, or for all 7 rounds, I should say, were there teams that had drafts that you went, you know what, I like the direction they're headed in. They're building a roster that I think can be competitive versus teams that just left you scratching your head going, I'm not sure what the hell on God's green earth they were doing.
It's always interesting because everyone's going to gravitate towards the Jets. And I agree, they had a fantastic draft, but when you have that much draft capital, you should be on like the winners list if you're semi-competent. So that's always the interesting thing to gauge here. I liked what Joe Douglas did. Fantastic draft. You plugged premium position holes and you get value simultaneously. Typically, those two things don't coincide, right? Like the financial cost or the draft capital it takes to pick up certain positions like they picked up, right? Defensive end, corner. Those are like premium price tagged, inflated type positions. So, you snag Sauce Gardner, you get Wilson at receiver with teams paying $100 million plus and giving up capital to do so. And then defensive end with Jermaine Johnson at 26. The Jets filled premium position needs and then managed to do so finishing 6th in draft value relative to where those players were expected to land. So you definitely want to give the Jets some kudos. Baltimore is always a winner in the draft. They just know what they're doing year in, year out. Kyle Hamilton falls to them. He doesn't run a great 40. Had some injuries towards the end of the regular season at Notre Dame. We've heard about safety being an overvalued position, but in today's NFL, that's not the case for some guys. If you have a safety that can play in the slot, that can match the physicality of a tight end in coverage, that can make plays on the ball, that can blitz off the edge, that's a luxury, and Kyle Hamilton can do all of those things. So I thought they had a good draft. You go and maybe you overdraft Lindenbaum, but it's the best center in this draft. He's an athletic freak. The only downside is the arm length. I believe PFF graded him out the best college center of all time in their ratings, which is saying a lot. But I know the sharp guys got beat up on that prop. They were going over 25.5, I believe. They were even going over 27.5. And then all of a sudden, you get a little unfortunate with the Ravens making 2 trades in the first round and then saying, hey, we're looking at our board. This is a position of need. Let's go out and get them. And he kind of soiled some things there for professional bettors. Everything else, I mean, we touched on the Chiefs draft. I liked that a little bit. But again, when you have 12 picks, you can be a little bit more maneuverable and go and get some things that you need. The Eagles were interesting. I did speak to Warren a little bit about this earlier in the week, and I think we know maybe some of the shortcomings that Howie Roseman has had recently, but in general, there's a lot of organizations that would like to be Philadelphia when you're only 3 years removed from a Super Bowl. And if you actually look at the Eagles' last 2 offseasons, somehow Howie Roseman managed to turn Carson Wentz and a trade down with the Dolphins into Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown, Jordan Davis, and a first and second round pick in 2023. So you're doing some spinning of the dough right there. That is as good as it gets. I think we can probably debate what Jordan Davis is. The traits are obviously unreal. There isn't a guy as athletic as him at that size that I have seen. He's going to get to learn from 2 of the best interior linemen in Cox and Hargrave. And I think Philly envisions him turning into a competent pass rusher so he can play 3 downs. Now, there was this quote that surfaced from a Philadelphia scout, and the quote was basically, Davis played limited snaps because Kirby recruits so well. He has to play young guys in blowouts so they don't transfer out the next season. And while true, that really wasn't the case for Jordan Davis when you look at even the biggest games that were the most tightly contested. He just wasn't a 3-down guy. If he eventually becomes a 3-down guy, this is probably a home run pick because Jonathan Gannon's defense requires elite interior line play. We'll see what comes of that pick.
Yeah, it's always interesting because so much is made of defensive ends and being able to generate pressure off the edge. The Myles Garretts of the world, the Von Millers, what have you. But to your point, we've seen that most quarterbacks hate pressure coming up the middle, and if Jordan Davis can be that guy and collapse the pocket, then it'll obviously pay dividends. Obviously, Philadelphia hasn't exactly been the stop unit we've anticipated, whether it's questionable cornerback play or a variety of other factors. So it's definitely interesting. When you look at teams that you were disappointed in, I'm not sure if you want to try and take the low-hanging fruit and go, what are the New Orleans Saints doing? Trading a slew of picks for receivers and offensive linemen and such, or if there was another team that just really left you scratching your head.
Yeah, the Saints are interesting because they just never die, right? They're always trying to win, and I think you have to love that as a fan base, even if it's not the most prudent decision. But their thought process is, we like what we have with Jameis Winston. Michael Thomas is going to return. We're going to go get Chris Olave, and that was like the worst kept secret known to man because Chris Olave's props were steamed under 17.5, knowing he wasn't getting past the Saints, I believe, at 16 initially, right? So trading up to go and get your guy, I don't know if that makes the most sense. Chris Olave, to me, is an interesting case study. I'm not here to project receivers at this point in time, but guys who watch film that are far more savvy than me say he doesn't have the entire route tree. And if you look at his body composition, there are parts of the field where he refuses to go. Now, if he's a compliment to Michael Thomas, so be it. You have your speed receiver. But the whole receiver thing at Ohio State does make me a little nervous. right? You play in the Big Ten where it doesn't feel like there's a ton of athletes at cornerback from opposing teams. It looks like an absolute layup drill. Everyone's wide open. When you have 4 receivers on your roster, right, that are all going to go in the first round when Smith and Jigba comes out next year, who's the defender guarding? Has any of these guys ever seen a double team? I just see him running wide open. So that makes me nervous. I think Smith and Jigba is probably the best of the batch when you talk about Jamison Williams, obviously transferred to Alabama, but was part of the Ohio State juggernaut at wide receiver. I think Smith and Jigba probably becomes the best of that 4 wide receiver crop. So it's interesting. I'm not completely sold on Olave, but the Saints have gone an interesting route, and they doubled down, right? Went out and got Tyrann Mathieu, signed him right after the draft. I believe that was on Monday. The Patriots, that's kind of the low-hanging fruit here. You don't want to bash Cole Strange, and obviously the Patriots have had a long history of great success at offensive line. Dante Scarnecchia has kind of built the mindset there within that organization of what they're looking for from offensive linemen, but that doesn't negate the fact that you could have gotten Cole Strange in the second round or even later on. You just start to kind of scratch your head of what's potentially transpiring there because we love Bill Belichick. We think he's a great game day coach. He certainly gets more out of the talent, but it's very difficult to not think Tom Brady was certainly a larger percentage of the winning that went on in New England. And right now, after how things have unfolded with Brady winning a championship for another organization, we're probably at like the 70-30 in terms of percentage of who was more responsible. And God forbid the Bucs make another run and the Patriots fail to make the playoffs this year, that gap probably widens in who's more responsible. I don't know what they're doing. I really don't. Jacksonville, I tweeted out on draft night that this is probably one of the most boomer bust off seasons that we've seen, at least my time on planet Earth. I just, I don't know what's there. But what are your thoughts on Jacksonville?
I think that they have so many needs to try and fill that, in my opinion, I would have rather taken a guy with a higher floor in Aiden Hutchinson with the number 1 pick than going all in for Trayvon Walker, because I know that there are a lot of things, and you draft guys that have higher upside depending on where you are. I mean, we do it. Any fantasy player does the same thing when you're looking at it. And of course, in real life, it's not quite the same level of execution. But Walker didn't blow me away when I watched Georgia football every Saturday throughout the course of the fall. And I want to say it was ESPN Stats and Info that put out a stat. And while every stat does have noise, and it's always interesting when you see some of these narratives get spun, that we haven't had a number 1 pick in the NFL draft since 1967 that wasn't named all-conference first team or all-American. There's generally a reason for that, because if you're not producing at the college level amongst the blue blood programs, what leads me to believe that suddenly this light bulb is going to flip on and you're going to be a transcendent talent at the next level? So I know there was a lot of hemming and hawing and stuff that went on behind the scenes for Jacksonville, but I just think for a franchise that needs to build and they have to try and get some positive momentum in the wake of what was a debacle coaching hire in Urban Meyer, that I felt it was a major leap of faith, and one that I'm willing to admit, hey, look, if Trayvon Walker becomes an outstanding talent, he's a perennial Pro Bowler, then I'll eat crow here. I just felt like it was a huge reach.
Which mirrored the rest of the offseason. And that's kind of where I'm going with this boomer bust offseason for the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Going all out and spending on Zay Jones and Christian Kirk to bolster your receiving core?
Jacksonville fans will say, well, we had to spend the money, so we had to get somebody. To a certain point, but when you spend the money they've spent, and we're, I believe over $250 million at this point in free agency, and the best surefire player you got was a guard in Brandon Scherf, I don't know what Christian Kirk is. I don't think he's worth that much. And then you go down the line, and I like Doug Peterson. He's a Super Bowl winner. He has that pedigree. Certainly more stable than what you had at head coach last year. But there are people behind the scenes that realize that once Doug started to lose key components of his staff, he suddenly fizzled out. And then you add Trayvon Walker to this mix. And the backstory there is that you kind of hinted at was about 10 days out from the draft. Head coach wanted one player, offensive coordinator wanted another player, GM wanted another player. Owner had to step in and kind of weed things out, and they landed on Trayvon Walker. And so it's always interesting to see the different ways teams elect to approach a draft. And I, kind of liken this to a Madden rating almost as an example, right? You have a guy that can be plug and play. He might be an 88, but you know kind of what you're getting. And then you have Trayvon Walker, who might be an 88, but he can get to like a 95. I just didn't see it. To your point, there was zero production. All the measurables and traits are through the roof. But when you look at him lined up outside as an edge rusher, 9% pressure rate. Okay? And there's going to be 8, 10, every single guy who started for Georgia being drafted. Offenses couldn't really say, hey, he's our focal point. We're going to double this guy. We're going to chip this guy. And to that point, if you look at Trayvon Walker, over 49% of his pressures last year came unblocked or on cleanups. Okay? So that's always the interesting factor here is, Detroit sprinted up to take Aiden Hutchinson.
Which
here's our
the
pick.
NFL was not happy about, by the way. Did you read that story?
I did. And that's kind of the interesting component here is like Aiden Hutchinson fits the bill from a number of ways, right? He's a premium position. They needed help at that position. He played at Michigan, so he's going to sell a ton of jerseys. The one knock on Aiden Hutchinson was he's in the 8th percentile of arm length. And so when you do put on the tape, sometimes when an offensive lineman's able to lock him up, he can't get out of it. So that's probably so when you're comparing those two, like the production was better from Aiden Hutchinson, the traits and measurables are better from Trayvon Walker. We'll ultimately see what unfolds.
Yeah, it's always interesting. And look, even with all the advanced analytics, the scouting, and everything else that we have at our disposal now, or I should say teams have at their disposal, drafting is still an imperfect science. And hey, the reality of it is over the next couple of years, we'll see if the Jags are going to make all of us that doubted the pick look like fools. When you look at some of the different positions that are out there, Payne, and I don't know how deep you want to dive on some of these, the three that, we had talked about, looking at some of the defensive ends, you address the wide receivers a little bit. We know 6 went in the top 18, and of course the quarterbacks, where we saw a variety of quarterback prospects fall like rocks, other than Kenny Pickett, who was the lone first-round pick. And the draft market on that particular prop was fascinating, which I can get to. Was there something that jumped out at any of these position groupings that you thought, hey, look, this is notable and worth sharing, or things that you really liked the teams were doing?
Yeah, so, we're running over an hour now and we haven't gotten any of the Derby coverage, so we don't have to go into each one of these individually. But we talked about Sky Moore a little bit. We mentioned Pickens. Jahan Dotson's an interesting name. I think he went higher than most people thought, but if you actually look at what he did at the college level, there's a lot of people that think he's better than a Chris Olave because he has a much wider route tree, and the focus was solely paid on him by opposing defenses. So that's an interesting one there. When you talk about quarterbacks, what's so shocking to me is we all knew this was a horrific draft class for quarterbacks, and then all of a sudden when everyone started dropping like a rock, they were like, can you believe that? Yeah, we told you the draft class sucked for quarterbacks. It's not shocking. Pickett's interesting. I think there's certainly some upside there. He's familiar with that environment. There are some nice young weapons there. Desmond Ridder fits the profile, size, stature, mobility, arm strength. Every time he did step up in class, which is one of the things we outlined when we gave out Alabama and Cincinnati under, was he shit the bed when he stepped up in class. Not very accurate from the pocket. Willis, we kind of mentioned there. He's a guy that's just not a great decision maker. Hopefully he can learn from that. Takes a ton of sacks. So that is a long uphill battle. Certainly the traits are there, the skills are there, but it's going to take some time. Matt Corral was a quarterback that I liked. One of the largest steamed props that we had going over Matt Corral started at 32.5, went out and leaked to 39.5 before it was ultimately removed from the board. I think it was a little surprising that he was taken ahead of Sam Howell, especially with the Panthers taking him, right? But they got to see Sam Howell basically whenever they wanted to, right? Being both in Carolina. They chose Matt Corral. Hopefully he's able to get some of the off-field demons corrected, and that was the cause for his drop. Bailey Zappi, I have no idea. Right? I mean, obviously we loved watching him at Western Kentucky. That offense doesn't necessarily translate to the NFL level, even as it begins to be a little bit more pass-happy of a league. That style of offense is, I don't know, just hasn't really turned out many quarterbacks. We'll see what transpires there. But that's really my thoughts. I mean, we talked a little bit about the receivers. Drake London is interesting. Certainly there are some predictive measures there that you can take past scouting, and I tweeted about that, about college receivers against outside man press coverage and why that is a predictive metric. And it's not the end-all be-all, but why it's predictive is most teams at the college level don't have cornerbacks they feel are good enough and they're comfortable with enough to play outside press man. So when they do, that becomes a nice matchup to watch. And against outside press man, Drake London averaged 3.9 yards per route run. A guy like Jamison Williams was under a yard. And when you start to look at recent history, who was fantastic in those categories, well, it's guys like Jamar Chase. Who was downright horrific in that category? A guy like Jalen Reagor. So it does have some merits. It's not the end-all, be-all. But I know a lot of people were like, hey, Drake London doesn't have outside wide receiver one speed. He can't possibly go eighth. To me, he's a grown man. And when you look at Arthur Smith, you start to think about his pedigree, right? He's a tight ends coach with Tennessee. He likes a big body receiver. He dealt with A.J. Brown. He dealt with guys like Corey Davis. That's kind of what he knows. And I think Drake London's interchangeable. He doesn't necessarily always have to line up outside. You can line him up in the slot. It's a nice big target there with Pitts. That's going to be tough to defend.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to figure out what the Atlanta Falcons are. It's just hard for me to wrap my head around the fact that a franchise that needed so many pieces goes out and uses a first-round pick within the top 10 to draft another receiver. I know Kyle Pitts, obviously a tight end, but just always wonder about roster construction. But we'll see exactly how all that materializes for Atlanta. But either way, an interesting...
You need a big catch radius with Marcus Mariota throwing.
Yeah, I don't know if a big catch radius is going to do it. And let's not kid ourselves. Marcus Mariota probably starts 4 games, ends up getting hurt on a scramble, whether it's a soft tissue injury or something else, and Desmond Ritter's out there, and there not maybe a catch radius anywhere in the Atlanta suburbs that'll help with Desmond Ridder and some of the accuracy issues that could plague him at the next level. But you highlighted that already, and it's probably a different discussion for a different day. Want to encourage all of you guys to follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast. But it's time to break things up with introducing a fresh perspective. He's gracious enough to join us every Thursday throughout the course of football season. Stop by to talk a little college basketball as well during the month of March. So figured it was only appropriate to bring John Sheeran back in the wake of a lot of NFL offseason activity amidst the Derby prep as well. You, of course, can follow John on Twitter. That's at JSheeran, JSheeran1981. And John, I wouldn't be doing my job as host here if I didn't start with the hard-hitting questions right off the top. And we see so much buzz about the NFL draft and how it's such a difficult proposition for the sports books, from the moment they hang numbers to trying to adjust as aggressively for every mock draft that's out there. When you look at the NFL draft at FanDuel, fun to book, a challenge, pain in the ass. I mean, what kind of adjectives would you just use to describe this particular endeavor?
I think probably all of those, Todd, to be honest. It's a lot of fun. Obviously, it's football, and we're back to the NFL after, small hiatus. Everyone's excited to see who drafts well and who doesn't. Everybody has an opinion on all elements of that, but it's a really difficult proposition for us to try and generate any positive revenue. I think it's a good opportunity for bettors out there to be able to hone in on one or two teams or one or two specific picks and potentially have an edge there over, just one opinion on our side of the counter. So it's certainly a challenge, but maybe wouldn't be as downbeat on it or look at it in isolation from a revenue perspective in isolation. I think that would be a mistake.
Now, we saw a number of books out here in the desert specifically take a very different approach to booking the draft this year than what we've seen in the past. It's only been legal in Nevada for 4 years, but some of the biggest shops waited until the Monday leading up to it, knowing that they had to pull numbers 24 hours before the events were going to unfold out here. From a philosophical standpoint, when you talk about that, kind of being a loss leader, is there discussion for you guys to expand the menu, maybe limit the size of bets, or how do you try and go about learning from previous experiences, knowing that the draft, maybe more so than any other event out there, is based on perfect information?
Yeah, I think it's difficult. I think, operators, and certainly we will have done this, is refined limits over time as you learn from how difficult it becomes to try and make any money. So that's an understandable step that I think is reasonable. But when it comes to the proposition overall and the product, we want to be aggressive. We want to offer as many markets as we can. We want to give people choice, the same as we do in a regular season NFL week. So from that perspective, I think our view is that we continue to, try and do better, try and be more accurate and make more aggressive decisions when we get information from bets. I think that's an area we can certainly improve on. But overall, like I say, my view is that a lot of the winnings that people will generate from the draft are reinvested into season-long wins or futures on the NFL outrights. And from that perspective, I think books are too harsh and too quick to make aggressive decisions to take down or maybe reduce the amount of time that they have the proposition on site for.
That part makes a ton of sense. And I think it's one thing that a lot of our listeners, when they hear different bookmakers from shops, we're making you the exception, that hear everyone crying foul, they forget that all these various events don't operate in a vacuum. That one NFL event can lead to subsequent activities, preseason, regular season, what have you. So that part makes a ton of sense when you break it down that way. Payne, did you have any other hard-hitting questions that you wanted to badger the witness with in regards to draft philosophies and such?
No, we're going to move on. We're going to talk to John about what we brought him in for. And one thing that we do is when there's big events and we are not specialists in that event, we bring in someone that is. And John, you are the resident horse whisperer this week. I want to ask you about horse racing in general. What's the first thing you look for when you're handicapping a horse race?
The first thing I will certainly concentrate on is the pace of the race. I think outside of the really top tier, and I appreciate that's why we're here this week, but in general, I think if you can figure out how a race is likely to be run, what horses are going to be on the lead and what sort of pace they're going to run at, I think you'll find yourself focusing on horses that are likely to be benefited from any particular scenario, i.e. how the race is going to be run. I think that will lead you to more winners, because outside that top grade, I believe a vast majority of race results are a function of how the race is run rather than the relative ability of the individual winner.
Makes a world of sense. Now, the Derby does have this Super Bowl-like vibe to it. You get a lot of first-time bettors, a lot of bettors just placing one bet on the only race they'll make all season long. There's some noise attached to it. Is there anything specific to the Churchill Downs track in the Kentucky Derby that you look for?
I don't think so. I think Churchill is a reasonably fair track. It tends to be, not biased towards speed, particularly on the Derby card. You're going to get 20 horses in the field and everyone vying for a good early position, given the importance of the race. Everybody's willing to lay everything down to try and get to the front and win the race. So from that perspective, I would just say that the race itself is likely more often than not to be run at a very frenetic or furious pace. And that tends to usually leave me looking for closers unless you get a generational talent to somebody like a Justifier and American Pharaoh. Outside of that, I tend to look for the slower type horses earlier who are likely to be strong at the finish, just given how competitive the races usually run early.
You mentioned looking for closers. Are there any horses that are catching your eye, whether it's straight bets or hitting the board on exotics?
Most of my betting will be framed around the one, Mo Donegal. I think he's a horse that's been a little bit masked as to his relative ability so far in his career. He's only had 5 starts. He's won 3 times. His debut was over an insufficient test of stamina at Belmont, and he actually ran really well in that race. He didn't run well in Gulfstream in February in the Holy Bull, but that was a track to me that looked like it didn't suit him, a really speed-favouring tight track that usually favours horses on the front. But his 2 runs either side of that, both at Aqueduct over a mile and an eighth, were really impressive, and I think masked how superior he was in those races. They weren't the fastest run races in the world, and he was still able to manage to win. He's got a really good leg kick, and I think he's exactly this type of horse that you want in a race like this. I think because he's drawn in stall 1, which has historically been a bad gate, a lot of people will desert him, and for that reason I think we'll get a nice bit of value on him on Saturday afternoon. I think he'll be a little bit bigger than the morning line of 10-1, somewhere in the 12 to 15-1 range, I would think. And I think he's more like a 6 or 8-1 shot in reality.
Before I kick it back to Todd, maybe give us the inverse, John. Any horse you're looking to completely stay away from or even fade in the head-to-head matchups?
Yeah, it's a good question. Zandon is a horse who has very similar form line to Mo Donegal in the Remsen, that he actually lost by a nose to Mo Donegal, but he's likely to be a 3-1, 4-1 in that range. And I just don't understand why we'll get 3 times the price on Mo Donegal. So he's a horse that I like. I think he'll be involved in the race. I'd probably more look to try and fade the likes of Epicenter. I think that horse is very easy to like. I think he'll take a ton of cash. Will probably have suppressed odds on the day, and while I fully respect him, I just don't think he'll offer any value at all.
So much horse racing to try and process. It's almost like speaking a foreign language every time of year when you get through the Triple Crown out here, and of course Breeders' Cup. That oftentimes can get lost in the luster during the course of the NFL season. Before we let you go, though, John, did want to kind of ask, when you look at the NFL schedule, we know it's going to be released in earnest a week from today on May 12th. What does the offseason look like? I know the offseason has gotten significantly more condensed from an odds-making standpoint. How fast can our listeners expect some of those week 1 numbers up? And are there plans for you guys to release maybe games of the year, full schedules, or some of the different wrinkles that'll separate FanDuel from the competition?
Yeah, as you always ask us these type of questions, and I think our goal is always the same, to try and be as early as we can to market with as broad an offering as we can potentially come up with. So I think everything that you mentioned is certainly on the table. We certainly want to get to a place. I don't think it'll be this season, but sometime soon, I think we want to get to a place where every scheduled game is already priced on the website. There's no reason that it shouldn't be. We don't need to wait for weeks and weeks before we start to put up select games. So I think that's a world that's coming reasonably quickly. Like I said, I don't think we'll get to it this off season, but certainly aim to model it out and build it in an automated way that makes it easier to manage, and then we'll be certainly motivated to get it up. For this season specifically, I think we have all of our ratings refined after the draft. I think we have our potential matchups. It's just a case of adjusting slightly for the schedule, as you say, Todd, and that's something that we can get through pretty quickly. So I would expect to see us aggressive and up with those markets as soon as we possibly can, certainly for week 1 and 2, and potentially then even just for key teams in the jurisdictions where we know we're operating. So local teams, as we call them, I think we'll have an extended schedule of price games up for the season for those teams at a certain point in the next couple of months.
He is a man of many talents, one that you can follow on Twitter at Sheeran. That's JSHEERAN1981. And John, we can't thank you enough for making time. We know you're a big deal now. Heard your spot last week on the Pat McAfee show. And just always remember where you came from, my friend. It's been great having you all football season. Looking forward to chatting more as we get closer to toe meeting leather in early August.
Appreciate it, guys. Thank you.
It's funny, Payne. We've been doing this podcast for a handful of years now, and every time we talk about the Derby, we've had some very decorated guests on all along the way that live and breathe horse racing, not just for the 4 biggest races, but that'll handicap the ponies throughout the course of the year. So it's always fun to hear them speak their language, and you could tell the emotion, the energy, and the level of excitement that John has trying to break down this 20-horse field.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. When I first realized who John was on Twitter, it was just constant tweet storms of horse racing. Now, he did divulge something once we got off the air, and there is this underlying thing here where the Kentucky Derby has this Super Bowl-like approach to it, and there might not be a ton of value in just kind of the straight pool, but he did divulge a nugget earlier in that day. Should we divulge the nugget?
It's your call if you want to share it.
John says he likes race 3, Derby Day, the 8-horse, Talking Book. I'm going to actually bet that. And I'm going to bet it at a place that offers fixed odds.
You just destroyed the entire pari-mutuel pool.
which is important. I really like to bet into a fixed market. Obviously, that's going to be a little bit more profitable if you have influence on the market as opposed to taking track odds. Not everyone offers fixed odds, but that's one tip, I think, when you are betting the Derby in general. I would also start to shy away from the exotics a little bit, right? Those can approach, a 25% hold market. I think it's interesting from the sense that, to me, and you would know better than I would because you've booked this, but exotics are very much like parlays and teasers in the sense that they can be really profitable if executed right, but 98% of people don't execute them right. It's like a basketball game, right? Everyone goes out in the court and has their shorts and jersey and sneakers. Only 2% can drive baseline and get away with it. And that's kind of how I look at exotics. So just be very aware that you're delving into like a 25% hold market when you start loading up the trifectas and all that stuff.
Yeah, 18 cents in the dollar for the parimutuel pool as the low end of things. There's a reason during my time at Caesars that we stopped booking in-house Quinellas because they were not a profitable endeavor, and bettors were able to take advantage of that. So to your point, I know people get excited when they see those large prices hit the tote boards, especially on Derby Day, the Preakness, the Belmont, or of course the Breeders' Cup, but realizing the house is getting more than their fair share. And it's part of the reason that you've seen a true erosion of horse racing, even from those most loyal to it, that have been in the business for so many years. And again, want to remind all of you, our loyal listeners, biggest horse race of the year, the Kentucky Derby. FanDuel has you covered. Go to tvg.com. Use our promo code BetTheBoard. $200 risk-free to have a little fun. You can bet John's horse in race 3. You can bet the Derby. So many different ways to put your money to work for you. But Payne, we're not done with our Derby coverage here yet.
We are not. And this is something we've never done before. Have an anonymous guest on our podcast. He was nice enough to pre-record us a little nugget, about 10 minutes, and this is interesting. So you are actually aware of who this is, and for our listeners who watched Action on Showtime, probably know of this gentleman as well because he was the fellow that did not show his face and had his voice distorted a little bit. He is quite sharp betting and has an interesting philosophy to booking behind the scenes as well. So we've done some things to distort his voice as well, but he is very savvy when it comes to the ponies. I know when he sends me tips, Todd, they don't usually come very often, but I would say 2, 3, 4, 5 times a year, I'll just get a random text, bet this horse. I do it without looking, and it typically does quite well. So, without further ado.
Appreciate it, guys. Thanks for having me on. I'm going to go through some of my thoughts and thought process of handicapping the 148th running of the Kentucky Derby. Hopefully you guys will be able to get some good information out of this listen and make some money off of this event. The Kentucky Derby is the holy grail of horse racing. It's the Super Bowl. It's the biggest horse racing event, $3 million purse. Recently raised from 2019, which time it was around $2 million. Everyone bets on this race. My mom bets on this race. My wife bets on this race. My girlfriends bet on this race. Everyone does. Some betting advice, again, just like the Super Bowl, it is only one race. You don't want to be spending your whole paycheck trying to take a shot in the dark. And this is one of the tougher races to handicap. A, because of how many horses are in it. B, because it's just very, very difficult when you have a 24-horse field. Anyone who's been to the Kentucky Derby, they just tell you it's an outstanding time. It's a total social event. Everyone says that they love it. It's also the first leg of the Triple Crown. The second leg is going to be the Preakness. Third leg is going to be the Belmont. So let's dig in and have some fun with this. It's the 148th running of the race. They call it the fastest 2 minutes of sports. It looks like the weather should be pretty decent this Saturday, 72 degrees. There does appear to be a chance of showers earlier in the morning. It seems to be cleared up by race time. We'll talk about this later as far as track conditions are concerned. Some history about the race. There's only been 13 Triple Crown winners, with the last one being Justify in 2018. Before that was American Pharaoh in 2015. I think one of the reasons why it's been so difficult for a horse to win the Triple Crown recently is we're seeing more horses not entering the first two legs of the Triple Crown and then being entered, say, closers in the Belmont Stakes, which gives them an obvious advantage when you have a horse that's raced in the Kentucky Derby and then the Preakness, and now they have to be shipped out to New York in the humidity of the summer and win that third leg. It's very, very, very difficult. The top track time for the Kentucky Derby was set in 1973 by Secretariat at 1 minute 59 and 40. There's only 2 horses that have broken the 2-minute mark out of the 147 races so far. There have been quite a lot of long shots which have cashed here, which is again why I think it's very, very difficult to handicap this race. I do think there's better odds in other races, but it's a fun race, so you want to have fun with it. Some of the long shots in 2009, Mind That Bird hit at 50-1. 2005, Giacomo at 50-1. I did have that horse also. Charismatic in 1999 at 31-1. They race over a dirt track. It's 1 1/4 miles. 40% of the track does consist of turns. The reason I even mention this is because for each position a horse is off of a turn results in approximately 25 extra feet that they have to run in that one specific turn. So if you're 4 wide on a turn, that horse is going to be running an extra 100 feet, which can obviously add up in a very, very, very important race like this. There are some key stats as far as gate position, and since 2011 of the 22 winners have broken from the 13 gate or higher. 70 races prior to 2000, just 11 broke from 13 or higher. So the trend is the winner is coming from a wider starting position. No horse has won from the first position since 1986. The only horse from the 1, 2, or 3 gate to win since 1986 was Real Quiet in 1998. He also won the Triple Crown. So since 1987, the 1, 2, and 3 slots winning has only been 1 out of 102 starts. Gate 5 has produced the highest win rate of 10.9, with the last in 2017 of Always Dreaming. Gate 10 has also had a high cash rate of 10.6. That last winner was Giacomo. The 17 gate has never produced a winner, and its last top 5 finish was all the way back in 2005. Top trainers who have won 6 times each: Ben Jones, Bob Baffert. Some of the top trainers who have never won: Steve Asmussen, who's had 23. He does have an entry of Epicenter in here. Chad Brown, who's had 7 entries, and he has Zandon in here. So this will be interesting to see if they can break that trend. Some things I look at when betting this race: again, it's a real tough race to handicap. There's so much congestion. A horse really needs just a perfect run to win this race, and usually a little bit of luck. I personally, with this type of a race, look for horses on the pace or stalking. Again, this is in contrast to, say, the Belmont Stakes, where I'm looking for closers. I look to fade some of the horses that tend to close on this, mostly just due to the congestion in the home stretch. I also look at different factors when I take into consideration the track conditions. Did a jockey jump horses? He started on one horse and now he's over to another one. What kind of pedigree the horse has? Is he bred for speed? Is he bred for distance? Is he better on the dirt? Is he better on a poly track? All those things I take into consideration when handicapping horse racing, and this race is no different. So after giving you guys all those boring stats, let's get down to the nitty gritty. Who's going to win? Well, there is a race on Friday, the Kentucky Oaks, which is a 3-year-old fillies race. I'm not going to break that down, but I do like Nest as well as Secret Oath in that race. As far as the fastest 2 minutes in sports is concerned, let's start with a few likes and fades of the first horse in the first gate, Mo Donegal, and basically Jockey Ortiz. Pletcher's the trainer. He's had 5 starts, 3 wins, 2 shows. He has a pedigree of Uncle Mo, who's one of my favorite horses. He's a clear-cut closer. So a closer, again, I look to fade in this race. Again, with the one position, which has had a horrible cash rate in the money, this is going to be a horse I am not going to be putting my bet on. This is a horse that I would like to fade in a matchup. And when we talk about matchups, some books offer head-to-head matchups, one horse versus the other. This is one that I'll be looking to fade. Next horse is the 3 horse, the second favorite, Epicenter. He has 6 starts, 4 wins, 1 place. He won the Risen Star Stake in the Louisiana Derby. He's a pace setter, so even though I'm not a big fan of the 3-hole, I do think that this horse, if he gets a great break, could hit the board. He is live. The number 9 horse, Tis the Bomb, 30-1. 8 starts, 5 wins, 1 place, 0 shows. He has 4 Grade 1 stakes wins in 8 starts, but only one of those races has the horse won on a dirt track. The rest of them have either been on turf or synthetic track. In the Holy Bull Stakes, which is at Gulfstream, a turf track, which included White Barrio, Simplification, and Modenagle, he finished 7th, 20 and a 4th lengths off of the lead. So in my opinion, Tis the Bomb, the number 9 horse, is a total fade. The next horse, which is my personal favorite, number 10, Zandon. He's a 3-1 favorite. After drawing that 10 spot, we did mention before how important that 10 spot is. He's trained by Chad Brown, who I absolutely love. This horse is a stalker, closer. He's had 4 starts, 2 wins, 1 place, 1 show, so he's hit the board every start. He won the Bluegrass Stakes, and he was 3rd in the Risen Star Stakes. He only lost by a nose to Modenagle in the Remsen Stakes, at which he was caught at the wire, and that's not going to happen this one because of the congestion in the back stretch. So I do like this horse to hit the board. Next horse is number 15 at 10-1, White Barrio. This is one of my favorite horses in the race. He is a little bit more of a long shot. He's got 5 starts, 4 wins, 1 show. He's really a consistent horse. He is a stalker. He looks to be close to the lead. He's won 2 out of 3 starts as a 2-year-old in 2 Derby prep races. He killed it. I mean, he won the Curlin Florida Derby. He's had 5 quality starts. The only negative with this horse is he hasn't won yet away from Gulfstream, but I'm not sure that this is this big of a deal. I definitely think he should be put into any type of exotic that you guys wish to wager on. And last but not least, I do like the 16 horse, which is Cyberknife. He's at 20-1. He has 6 starts, 3 wins, 2 place, 0 show. He's a stalker. He's a pace setter. He's had some really good workouts. He has a great trainer, Brad Cox. He's the reigning Eclipse Award winner. He won the Arkansas Derby. His pedigree is for stamina. Gunrunner was his sire, which we all know won the Breeders' Cup. He's a really good long shot. I would definitely time into exotics, and I do think this horse is live. So to recap some of the bet summary, I do like the 10 Zandon at 3-1, the 3 horse Epicenter at 7-2, 15 horse White Barrio at 10-1, long shot as the 16 horse Cyberknife, and fades for me. Biggest fade is the number 9, Tis the Bomb, and in matchups I would look to fade number 1, Modenagle. I think you probably get some good value on him. So I appreciate the time. Hopefully I can help you guys make some money. Back to Todd and Payne.
I've now listened to that interview 3 times, Payne, and I keep adding to my little notepad that I keep by, even what I do when you talk about the NFL and we don't break some of the games down. So I encourage all of our listeners here who may be their first time betting the Derby to listen to that not once, not twice, but 3 times, because there's so many great nuggets that you're not going to have the chance to ascertain just through one quick listen.
Agree. And here's an interesting question for you that's a little off the rails. So during his appearance on Action, towards the very end, I noticed he was putting apple jelly on his toast, which is a total psychopathic move. Okay? And to the point where now his nickname in the underworld is Apple Jelly. What is your go-to choice? I know you don't carb up very often.
I mean,
but when you eat toast, what are you putting on the toast?
I've been forced to carb up more through, these eating plans. I realized that was the deficient macro in my day-to-day diet. It's why by the time football season finished, I was like 138 pounds that you could roll me into Kids Gap for me to do most of my shopping. If I'm having toast and I'm using jelly, which to your point is rare, it's normally almond butter more than anything else. It's grape or strawberry, and there's no other consideration being made.
I'm completely with you. Grape and then maybe a strawberry preserves every now and
Are
then.
you
completely?
If you're,
we're on the same page for something for the first time ever. If people don't know this by now, Todd and I are like complete polar opposites.
It was
in every spectrum of the world. But believe it or not, somehow, despite what Twitter will tell you, you can coexist.
It was yeah, exactly. You don't have to be completely aligned with every single major issue or life choice to be able to have friends who think differently and force you to test your own preconceived notions. The one thing I will say though, Payne, despite your greatest push, the family has not yet adopted introducing meatballs to our Passover Seder. So you and Sebastian Maniscalco are going to have to come up with a little bit more compelling sales pitch before we finally invite Uncle Payne to break bread on one of our Jewish festivals.
I have a feeling this will take place at your house when I do eventually join. It'll be when you have your own family, and there'll be help. There'll be a little more push from an Italian that is now in your family. So it'll be like 2 versus 1 kind of thing.
Hey, I mean, the invite's already been extended, but I know you like to eat, like even on Thanksgiving, you like to start eating before the first football game even kicks off. So, I mean, that may as well make you I can't even wrap my head around the way that I approach that, since we don't break bread on Thanksgiving till at least the earliest halftime in the Cowboys game.
What's the whole procedure here? It sounds like there's a lot of reading and not a lot
Passover?
of eating for like 2 hours.
So
Yes.
it depends how in depth you want to get as far as your Passover Seder. The traditional way that you approach it is the retelling of the Passover story. So it's typically, I don't know, when you're reading from what the prayer book's called.
After about like the second year of that, we know the story, don't we?
Yeah, it's like 15 to 20 pages thereabouts, and everyone does things a little bit differently. One of the big things that you'll see, it's usually the youngest in the family, and my niece, not yet able to read Hebrew or anything close to that. It's the asking of the 4 questions. So that's one of the things that's most traditionally associated with it. But we don't do a ton in Hebrew. A lot of it's in English, and over the years, our Passover festivities have grown from 10 to 12 to, I think, my aunt and uncle hosted the first night this year, and then my mom hosted the second. I think we were upwards of 25 to 30 thereabouts.
Wow. Interesting. So from a betting perspective, everyone will see Todd's last name and assume that he would be a massive favorite if we set a line on who attended more bar mitzvahs. I am telling you, I would be the underdog of the century based upon where I live. And our dynamic in South Florida is a little different. One of my best friends was a Dominican Jewish person. One of my closer friends was also Jewish. We had this very eclectic gang. I had one of my best friends, black kid who was adopted by a white Jewish woman and a Spanish father. I mean, you just name it. It's very eclectic down here. So I have been to more bar mitzvahs, I would venture to say.
It's not even close. I mean, I grew up in a suburb where I think the only Jewish families were essentially on our block, and they were a couple of my best friends that'll be in my wedding, guys that you'll have a chance to meet for the first time for some bachelor party festivities. And yeah, I mean, I did that many at all, given the dynamic and the layout in our suburb. Whereas I talked to some friends that grew up in areas that had a lot more predominant Jewish population. There wasn't a time from age 12 to age 14, depending on where they fell in the age spectrum, that there wasn't a Saturday in the fall that they were at a bar or bat mitzvah. So it was a heck of a lot different than where I grew up. And other than family, I mean, I probably only went to a handful.
As I think about this in my head and put the timeline together, you're going to be getting married soon, kid potentially on the way. After that, I'm going to set the over-under at like 5.5 years on me being invited to Passover dinner and bringing meatballs.
That may be an aggressive timeline, one that I'm sure we can belabor throughout the course of preseason previews and a variety of other things. But, not getting completely away from the topic at hand, when you look at the horse racing and you talked a little bit about the exotic pools and everything else, is there any advice that you would offer up to those folks looking to bet the ponies for the first time?
Just bet it straight and bet it with fixed odds. Those are like the 2 biggest things. That is always the piece of advice I give someone who's betting horses for the first time. You hate to say this because you never want to judge a book by its cover. You ever go to the track and just look around? Not a lot of successful things going on there.
Depends what track you're going to. It's a little bit different as well. If you're
is
going
true. Depending on the time you're going as well, or the event you're going to.
If you're going to Saratoga and Del Mar for the 6-week meets, it's a lot more affluent crowd than if you're going to Los Alamitos on a Tuesday night to watch the quarter horses.
All right, this is running so long. Let's kind of divvy up a best bet here and get out of Dodge.
I didn't even know we were getting a best bet here. So see, even after all this time, you throw curveballs my way. I mean, I guess the floor is yours. Is it Stanley Cup? Is it NBA playoffs? Are you going to give up an adjusted win total? A Major League Baseball future? Where are we going for this best bet?
Oh, I think I have your future child's college tuition on Reds unders this year. Just kept betting them under. I don't even know how much money's on them at this point. It's really a sickening amount. Okay. Best bet, college football. We're going to go with the Pittsburgh Panthers under 9 wins. And I think this time of year is about getting to the numbers you think are completely off rather than diving into like the X's and O's. And what I know for sure is I'm not high on Pat Narduzzi, never have been. And you have a real suspect home field advantage. And if you look at Narduzzi during his time at Pitt, he wins roughly 7.5 games on average, even when you put in the 11-win season last year. He's eclipsed 8 wins one time during his tenure. And then you lose Kenny Pickett, the number 1 quarterback in the NFL draft. And then you're going to lose Jordan Addison, your top playmaker, and eventual first-round receiver in the transfer portal. I think it just makes sense to go under 9 here because when we talk about this in a couple months, that is not going to be the number. We just need, Todd, your buddy Craig, to keep 9 hanging out in Vegas for like the next 24 to 48 hours so people can get down.
I haven't really...
Can we make that happen?
I haven't really bet it yet, so does that mean I have to wait until all of our listeners get down first?
Yes, correct.
This is incredible. So I'm going to take it.
And if you have to take 8 in July...
I'm going to take a shit number on this so all of our listeners can try and get down. You know what? I'm not quite sure how I feel about that, so we'll have to address that more candidly off air.
The things we do for our listeners.
We'll see. Yeah, because you're telling me you don't have anything down on something you're giving out. I got a beachfront property that you're willing to use in Omaha, Nebraska, anytime you'd like during the summer months, my friend.
We can maneuver things a little bit. We don't take the hammer approach. There's some methods.
All right, I'll have to get creative, and I'll have to tap into my capital stash to try and see what I can do more so than doing account-based wagering from the confines of my desk. Anything else? Okay. Anything else you'd like to offer?
Let's wrap this up because this is the longest podcast.
That's what happens. It's preseason. We have to talk on a number of different topics, and it's how things go. People have needed to fill their bet the board void, and so that's what we've done. Go to TVG, everyone. Take advantage. Like we said, risk-free, up to $200 on your first single horse to win wager. That's available. And if that doesn't work for you, use our promo code BetTheBoard at FanDuel.com. Plenty of risk-free options as well for postseason endeavors, both NHL, NBA, Major League Baseball, regular season, whatever the hell you want to bet, FanDuel's got you covered. For John Sheeran,
college football win totals released last night.
Yes,
very simple.
They do have those as well, and it's a great opportunity to do that. So for John Sheeran, I want to thank him as always for joining. Pain Insider, I'm Todd Furman. Best of luck with all of your spring and summer endeavors. Some big announcements coming along the Bet the Board Twitter channel, so want to tune in for that. And for NASCAR fans, I think they'll be extremely excited about some of the developments that they'll see unfolding. But in the meantime, hopefully we'll see you at the window.
Thanks for listening to Bet the Board. You can catch Todd and Payne every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday during football season, breaking down the biggest NFL and college football games. And to make sure you don't miss any free best bets, subscribe to Bet the Board on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.